Hi, I'm Brad Teare, and today I'm all geared up with a new setup here, and I'm hoping that this will allow me to do some videotaping of my abstract process. Quite interesting about abstract is it takes place fairly rapidly, but there are long moments where I spend time over in this recliner simply, looking at the painting. It's quite interesting, this new process. I was a little chagrined, I guess, when all my gear arrived in the mail, and I thought, well, your studio is a disaster. Today is June 8th, 2016, and in a few weeks I'll be having a show here, just a few blocks away, actually. Basically, this is what a studio looks like, right before a show. I mean, there's just, my work obviously is about texture, and there's an element of chaos in texture. There's an element of the uncontrolled. Obviously, if you have a very flat surface, it's unlikely that there's going to be a lot of texture on that. I became comfortable with the idea of chaos when I started doing woodcuts. There's no such thing as a perfect woodcut, or if there is, it'd be very sterile. There's an aspect of cultured randomness in a woodcut that makes the woodcut very, very charming. In the absence of that, the woodcut becomes sterile. So I wanted to introduce that into my work. Some of my paintings, they tend to be a little less chaotic. I mean, the strokes are what you expect them to be. Now, I would like to introduce more chaos into some of my landscapes, and here's an example of one right here. This one is, you can see here, I'll move this back and step back a few paces, and you can see that this painting is in the form of a landscape. But the colors are rather arbitrary, the textures fairly arbitrary, and I want to even push that further. And so this painting, I intended this to be in the show, the upcoming show, but I don't think it's going to make it because I have not spent enough time over in my chair. This painting, once I figure out what to do with it, will probably come together fairly quickly. It's interesting that the abstract process is a little bit more technologically driven. That means that some of my techniques are dependent on the invention of new media. I'm not totally dependent on this. I mean, some of my mediums are like sand. I mean, that's been around forever. I think it's quite typical of me to, at least at one phase of the acrylic process, to, you might say, oil up the canvas with a medium of some sort and then paint into that. For example, over here, all the scratching was made possible, and especially on this one, using a variety of mediums. And then I think in this case it was a thick gel I used, and then I scraped into that layer. Now, when I was scraping into it, the paint actually looked sort of whitish because the gel had not dried, and when gel is wet, it still looks very white. That surface is a little flatter, and I use my sander here to kind of excavate down into other layers. So this large painting up on the mantelpiece is a little bit problematic. I like it, but I'm thinking it needs some more work. This is called Yellow Arc, and as the name sort of suggests, I think the basic motif's a little mundane, and I need to energize that by adding in some other elements. This usually entails adding layer over layer over layer until I'm getting some really complex textures. behind. I laid in some color over the top and then sanded down to previous layers. So it gets pretty complex. Sometimes it can be quite easy. I mean, these textures here are just brush marks, and the white is the white of the canvas. And sometimes I do use kind of a wet into wet technique, and that can be quite fascinating. So I'm really shaking things up, using a lot of media. This one is another strange painting. I really love what happened here. I mean, there's kind of like a tearing of the surface, and it's an interesting effect, but there's something that's a little too simple about it. And I may hang it just as kind of a crowdsourcing kind of a test, and see if what kind of feelings I have about it. That there needs to be a more textured surface onto which I put the layers of paint. So that's strictly just a matter of feel. You just have to kind of sit in front of the canvas and wait for that inspiration to strike. So that's an interesting process. And there's one of my easels. It's a horizontal easel, and I put some plastic over the top, and I will do pours onto that and pull off the chunks of paint and glue it onto a canvas. Or there's a lot of things I do horizontally that is quite interesting. So I'm really in a extremely experimental phase of my painting. I do have a show booked now here in town that will be a combination of my woodcuts and my landscape paintings, my oils, and I hope to have 3 or maybe possibly 4 large acrylics landscapes in that show as well, and we'll see how that goes. I'm finding that being more of a show-based or show-driven, project-driven schedule is much, much better for me than simply trying to crank out painting after painting. I think trying to create a body of work is a much more interesting project for me. So I think, after testing this gear, I think it's going to work. I think I can paint while I'm wearing this thing. I don't know. We'll try it. And I've got to make a few adjustments. To some degree, this gear is a little too far out. I need to get it closer so I can move it down onto my palette and show how I mix colors and so on. So I think that'll be really exciting. So stand by, and I hope that we have some great videos about a variety of processes, both acrylic and oils.